Okay, guys. My take is going to be a bit different from what you heard so far. So that's me. PLP architecture, we design large buildings. That's basically what we do. And we also are master planners, and we do a lot of town planning stuff. So that's obviously, we're approaching this from a completely different direction from you people who design vehicles. You see, we basically think that actually the car, the vehicle, is secondary to the real issue at heart. The real issue at heart is the actual network, is the road. The road matters. So, what happened with mobility? We started walking, and then we got horse and carriage, and that was all fine. Everything was well integrated, except that occasionally you got hung up by people. And then suddenly, 150 years ago, something really strange happened. We got two technologies developing. Okay, they were out of sync by about 50 years. You know, the railway came first, steel on steel, steam train, and the car came a little bit later. And they have developed in their own ways. And what I'd like to emphasize here is that the real difference between these two things is not steel on steel versus rubber on concrete. It's the way they're controlled. A modern train weighs 100 tons and travels at 300 kilometers an hour. So it's got an enormous momentum. It is an incredibly dangerous animal. So therefore, we have to control it properly. And that's what we do. Signaling systems and all the rest of it ensures that trains are actually much safer than cars. Cars are controlled by individual people who are incredibly fallible and very dangerous. So what we're saying with the car tube is, let's have a look at now we've got autonomous vehicles, whether we can combine the best attributes of those two forms of transport. Now, one of the things that I think should concern anybody who's involved in transport is to look at this diagram. So far, we basically urbanized half the world's population. We got the other half to go, and that is what they're having to put up with. So any transport solution that seriously begins to address this must start thinking about how we're going to roll out new transport solutions to the rest of the world in some way. But of course the tube, that is my tube in London. It's horrible. So if you start to look at Google Map, of course, every single city in the world that is worth its name is congested. You just look at it. Every city, everywhere. It's all congested. Every road is congested. And normally the tube lines and so on also tend to be congested. So where do we come from? Well, we're interested in pushing the boundaries of how we think about things. So what we experimented with is designing a brand new lift system, which meant that we could think differently about tall buildings, kilometer-tall building. It hasn't been built, of course. It's a thought experiment. But I just want to divide this thing into the vehicle, the track, the system, and the urban impact. So if you start to think about what transport actually is, what transport is somebody who wants to go from somewhere to somewhere else, okay? And you want to get there as quickly as possible without interruptions. A system is when there are lots of people who want to go from their location to their destination. So you get this cat's cradle. And then you start thinking about, okay, well, how do I deal with this? So most transport planners then immediately start thinking about grouping people. Hey, I am all in this general location, and I will be going to this other general location, but probably not all people in my location want to go to my same location. So suddenly it's like it's beginning to get complicated. So what you do is then you group them together and you put them onto some neutral transport system. In this particular case, the neutral transport system I've labeled as rail, but when I was in the States 2 weeks ago, I labeled it as freeway, because that's exactly what you do. You group people, you dump them onto some high-capacity system, and then you distribute them again. But we have something called the internet. And the internet is basically neutral grid, and it is very clever in how it is sending stuff around the grid. So why don't we have a neutral grid? And of course what it implies is that we need to have a transport pod to travel around on this neutral grid. Now, the issue is, of course, we already got one. It's called the car. And all the presentations you've seen this afternoon are all about designing the car. And I am absolutely sure that they are incredibly competent at doing it, and they will be designing wonderful vehicles. That is not the issue. That is not the problem of transport. So, if you start looking at the kind of untangling transport system, you can begin to say, well, like the internet, what is the simplest possible junction? So this is the one that we've dreamt up, which is basically saying, okay, it's working like a scissor, and it joins and it separates the traffic depending on where you want to go. And that's probably by far the simplest junction you can imagine. So then you start to think about the general structure of what you can do. So then you need to have a primary network, and the issue with the primary network is, just like on a motorway or an autobahn, the traffic should never stop, ever. That's the whole point of the system. But then you need a secondary network, which is your local road network, in essence, which is where you get off and you stop. And so you need a secondary network, and it could either be the existing road network, or it can be something that you build specially for this transport system. The issue with having a neutral grid is, of course, there are different ways of going through that neutral grid. So that the only real limiting factor, if you look at the geometry of this, you will find that by definition, it will always have enough capacity. Always. The only thing that limits the capacity is your destination. If your destination is overloaded, then the system will jam up. And you know it from driving on the Autobahn. It's not the Autobahn that gets stopped, it's when you get off the Autobahn that it blocks the Autobahn itself. And the secondary grid is something that connects up to the primary grid, and it allows you to actually go and drive to different destinations. And then, of course, you need to have a series of stops. So we are looking at, well, where do you put these systems? So our argument is, it's really interesting to hypothesize that actually a good place to put them is underground. We have built underground transportation systems for 150 years. One of the most important aspects of any transport system is your dwelling time. That is when your vehicle is not being used. And what I think every single person who is talking about autonomous vehicles never talk about the fact that the autonomous vehicle can drive itself around empty. Isn't that fantastic? That means that it can actually loiter in the system, it can go and park itself, and the issue is not the vehicle driving around with people in it, it's the vehicle driving around without people in it. That matters a lot. So we've designed just a putative system for stacking them, and of course when you stack them they will arrive in the order in which they happen to arrive, which is not the order in which they want to be retrieved out of the system. So we're actually using the propulsion of the cars themselves to actually sort themselves. So it's like it's a digital sort, but it's doing it because of the topology of the layout of the network. So, the ones that are there for a shorter time travel shorter distance through the stacking system. So, why should we redesign the vehicle when it is actually the control system that needs to be changed? And the real issue is actually the separation between cars. So, when you drive manually, it's recommended to be 3-second separation. That's about 66 meters if you're driving at 80 kilometers an hour. But if you have platoon driving, you can drive them 2 meters apart, and your capacity suddenly becomes completely and utterly different. So this already exists. All the car manufacturers in the world have been running tests on this. It's been going for at least a decade. It hasn't been rolled out yet. Why not? Because there's not enough pressure for car manufacturers to collaborate in it. So what do we want in the transport system? We want it to be convenient, point to point. We want it to be fast. We want it to be safe. It wants to be sustainable environmentally, which therefore means probably electric cars. It wants to have no congestion, and it wants to have a pricing system that actually means that it's a fair pricing system, which means that you will pay for what you get. So, point to point. Obviously, any transport system worth its weight will have an app. And you've got the Uber one on the left, when you happen not to own the car, and on the right you have a similar transport system where you happen to own the car. As far as we're concerned, talking about the car tube is we completely don't care. It will go one way or the other. It will go both ways. You will share cars, you will not share cars. Some people will own them, other people won't. And again, you've all seen these things, you know, the experience of booking it online and so on. What is different here, of course, is that you will book it in advance so as to be able to make sure that you're actually going to arrive at your destination when you want to get there. So car stacking is a really important concept. You need to be able to stack your car away. And I mean, car parking, of course, in capacity will double as soon as you're autonomous vehicles, because half of the car parking, as I know, having laid out car parks, is actually taken up by the driveway. The driveway is a complete waste of space, because if you have an intelligent sorting system, you can park cars solidly nose to nose, as long as you have figured out when they need to be retrieved and how they need to be retrieved. This is obviously insanity. We're driving at 25 kilometers an hour in the central London. It's crazy. And this happens in all the major cities in the world. Berlin is probably fractionally better, I would guess. Probably you're driving at 30 or 35 kilometers an hour. But that's not the speed we want of a transport system. We want to drive 2-3 times as fast as that, for sure. Killing people is a bad idea, and I think we shouldn't do it. When I was in the States, it was interesting that they were arguing about whether they're killing 35,000 people or 40,000 people a year. That's a lot. And I think it is insane that we do this, and we've invented a system where we allow ourselves to kill people regularly every day. We need a sustainable environment, and it's not just a matter of pollution from nitrous oxide or carbon dioxide, but it's also things like noise. Noise is a horrendous object, and it tends to kill people. People who live next door to noisy streets don't live that long. It's a real issue. So whatever we do, we need to have a sustainable environment. Now, these are my pet hatreds. I really loathe this. If you start from the left, car parking by a railway station. What a completely wasted investment. Those cars are standing around for 8 hours doing absolutely nothing. And meanwhile, you have paid for an expensive train to take you to the central city. Timetable is an invention by the Victorians. It's complete insanity. I want something that actually takes me when I want to go to where I want to go. I don't want to wait around for the bloody train to turn up or be delayed or any of those things. And the one on the right is the most interesting one of all. This is the transport map of London, which probably every urban transport planner has seen and have admired and drawn exactly the wrong lesson from it. And their lesson that they've drawn from it is this is the way you topologically configure a network. And it's stupid, because it means that when you travel around in that network, when you want to change from one line to the other, you get off the train, up the escalator, down the escalator, wait for the next train. This is really, really deeply dumb. Okay? So, now when we look at capacity, you have the Crossrail, which is just about to open, and if you fill it with 1,500 people, so it means that you stop at every train stop, and of course only a handful of people get on and off at every stop, and they run a 5-meter interval, which is what they're saying that they're going to do, you get 18,000 people per hour. If you stick cars nose to tail 2 meters apart and you run it at a straight 80 kilometers an hour, you get twice the capacity. Now, Crossrail, they will probably double the capacity there because they're getting better signaling, they will get 2.5. My main point with this is a car system is just as efficient as a London underground system, as any metro system anywhere in the world. And this is the reason, of course, is you have a motorway, and the motorway is 6 lanes, but if you stuff them into a platoon, you get 1 lane, 1 single lane, as opposed to 6 lanes. And it suddenly means that all the infrastructure we built over the last X years is needs to be will be improved enormously. So this is how you possibly should be able to think about it. So this is, a train, but the train, of course, you split it up so that it can go to different destinations, And then, you can have lots of them. And you've got these things, and they're called cars. Why don't we just use the cars? Okay, this is the big the calculation, which is the density in whatever transport system you have, track you have, times the speed is equal to your capacity. This is the reason why you get congestion, because your speed falls to zero, and therefore your capacity falls to zero. This is a bad idea. These ones are just a comparison between the densities. At the top, of course, with smart cars, you will get a much higher density, probably equivalent to a railway train. But of course, the cars run continuously, whereas the trains, they come like a big sausage, and then there's a big empty space between them, which is why we get this calculation here. So, when you start looking at this, you suddenly realize that motorway intersection can be replaced by a single set of tunnels with an intersection like we've outlined, because you're running automated cars. It means that all of that motorway you could take away. Here's one of the issues that come up. Unless you have a segregated track, your kids will run out in front of the autonomous vehicles and stop them running. This is true for every system, every transport system we've ever built. You must have a segregated system to stop bicyclists, kids, anybody to get onto them. Any mixed traffic system will be slowed down. So this is how we looked at the notion of maybe putting a system like this in London. So this is using the standard tube line size tunnel, yeah, okay? And you connect the motorways. Of course, you could do the same thing in Berlin. You connect all the incoming motorways. You know it better than I do, but you probably know that there are places where basically traffic slows down. So this is what we can do with it. So what happens if the train picks you up at home? Sounds like a good idea. The train leaves when you want it to. Sounds like an even better idea. And you compare it with people having to get onto the train, and the train takes you directly to your destination. You don't have to get off at a station and up the escalator and all this kind of rubbish. And then you carry on, and you will find that, of course, that what if there was never any traffic jam? And if there's a traffic jam, you just drive down into the car tube. You look at all these violet cars, and you think, oh, thank God I'm out of that. And then finally, of course, the very best thing is your car can park itself. So when you arrive at your destination and you get out of your car, it drives off itself, completely on its own, and parks itself and gets back to when you want it. So this is what we can then do, is we can then give back the street to people, or give back the street to green parks. And this was just a slide I put up because at San Francisco, this is a BART system, but actually this is not what actually matters. What matters is the motorway system, the freeway system. And this is a standard afternoon in San Francisco. Look at it. Everything is standing still. London and other cities have been utterly transformed by cars becoming smart, very smart. Approaching London, there is the usual traffic jam on the M4. This driver, who has a meeting in the city, is very happy to have booked a car tube slot. Getting close to the M4 car tube entrance, the car prepares to join the platoon, and the driverless mode is engaged. This means that the driver can take his hands off the steering wheel. The car tube system is now driving the car. Journeys with car tube are astonishingly fast. With traditional car traffic, the journey from M4 to the embankment would have taken at least 40 minutes, but it will take only 14 minutes in the car tube. As the car enters the tunnel, the system offers choices of entertainment. The driver might want to watch a film or do some emails. Instead of the noisy fracas of stop and start motorway journeys, the car tube is quiet and smooth, flowing at a constant speed of 50 miles per hour. The car becomes a cocoon of privacy that completely erases the perception of infrastructure. As the car approaches the embankment exit, it warns that the drop-off is in 30 seconds. It then parks and the driver can exit. The car will park itself for 2 hours as instructed by the driver. The car can follow the driver so that if he wants to travel back from another exit, the car will reposition itself there. The car tube can be used by any electric and digitally controlled car, including delivery vans, Uber cars or taxis. They all collaborate to make the car tube as efficient as possible. The car will be in constant communication with the driver's mobile, conveying useful information instantly, such as whether the other attendees in the driver's meeting will be arriving on time, easily predictable if they're also using the car tube. Cars have been taken off the surface and gone underground, just like the old-fashioned tube. Vast tracts of roads have been changed to beautiful parks. So this is what, the entrance, this is what the station would look like on the car tube. This is a typical station. This is another layout of an underground station, which is equivalent to a London tube underground station. Now this is important, is how do you control traffic flow? So you will always have rush hour traffic, I think. And of course, what you need to do is you need to have some form of policy to constrain it so that your system doesn't overload, which means that you essentially need to be able to pre-book it. And you need to prevent things, so you can, for instance, force people to only have multi-occupancy cars in the morning and afternoon rush hour, that kind of thing. And then we've got two policies. This one is the Trump policy. You get what you pay for. And if you are rich, you get wherever you want to go instantly pretty well. Here's the Schultz policy. And Mr. Schultz says, no, this is absolutely insane. What we need to do is we need to make sure that the vehicles are used most efficiently, they're shared vehicles and all the rest of it. What's interesting is these are digital policies. You can switch this policy in a fraction of a second. So this is one technology that, of course, is going to need to be there because we need to do tunneling much more efficiently. And now let's have a look for 3 minutes on the impact of cities. So this is what Corbusier sold us. This is circa 1930, and this is what the new world was going to look like. And it looks sort of fairly attractive, but this is actually what we got. And this is what it looks like. Do you really like it? Do you think this is a good idea? So, what happens if you take the street and you take the cars out of the street and you put them underground? So now suddenly your streets become places for people to be. Streets are for people, not for cars. Cars don't belong in streets. You can have all sorts of interesting things. You've been down the Rambla, and there are lots of nice kiosks and things, or you can move your buildings closer together, because you've taken the car out of the street. So this could be cut and cover, or it could be other thing. And this is in Dubai, where we've been active, and this is horrible. I mean, it is absolute nightmarish. And that 6-lane motorway, of course, is already jammed. Every day, it's fully jammed. Traffic. That's what you could do. And of course, it's not a new idea. Paris is essentially built on the same idea. It's only that they put a different technology down the tunnel. We're saying, put modern technology down the tunnel, and then you can begin to think properly about what cities should actually be like. And we need to collaborate with lots of people, which is why I'm here. And I've got 1 minute and 32 seconds left. And I think, therefore, I managed to just about finish on time. Okay, thanks very much.